Hi, everybody. Happy Monday. It's the last day of February, and I'm really excited to have with me an incredible leader, Flory Wilson, who's the founder of Gender Ideal. And my name is Aparna, and we are really excited to have a conversation about how businesses can use data to drive action and greater accountability. And this weekly live is focused on all things data, and really there are no credentials needed for you to join in this conversation. So Flory, hi, will you just start with telling us a little bit about who you are and really why did you create Gender Ideal?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good morning, Aparna, and good afternoon, everyone. And thanks so much for inviting me to this conversation. I know we both have a mutual affection for data and talking about data and how we can use data to change norms and shift our current systems in effective ways. And so I'm really excited about this conversation. Yeah, to answer your question, I mean, my background, I have always kind of pursued roles that are at the intersection of kind of impact, social responsibility, and capitalism, right? So most of my roles have, been kind of quasi public, private partnerships or integrated social entrepreneurs. I started my career working for the federal government, doing international development work, had the opportunity to go overseas, work with businesses and meet entrepreneurs in a variety of different markets and understand, the challenges, but also the environments in which they thrived. And then I spent about 10 years working for the nonprofit B Lab, which is the organization behind the B Corp movement. I was really fortunate to join that organization when it was a kind of a nascent, almost like a startup, where we were working on this idea of, how do we shift capitalism in a direction where instead of focusing purely on shareholders, we can think about all stakeholders, right? And make sure that employees thrive and consumers thrive and the environment thrives, and really lift up, if you will, those organizations that were approaching their business models and their industries through that lens. And so, I loved my work at B Lab. I was there for about a decade. During that time, I became a mother. I had two young kids. And when I left B Lab in 2019, honestly, I was really burnt out. And so I spent this period of about 6 months kind of reflecting on why this phase of my life felt particularly challenging, especially given
Mhm.
that, candidly, I'm a person with a lot of privilege, right? Like, I'm educated, I have supports. I moved through this world with as a Caucasian woman, and but it felt really hard. And so I had a lot of conversations with women who were further along in their careers, further along in their lives, had kids, didn't have kids. Also, conversations with women who were starting out in their careers and who were observing many of the challenges in their professional lives and questioning how gender kind of had an impact there. And so, after this kind of period of reflection, I thought, well, is there a way to begin to kind of shift these norms and standards that we can kind of use by creating an aspirational vision for what a workplace can and should be doing to support its women, all of its women, and then, with that kind of aspirational vision, can we then take data that we collect from companies to say, here's how you're progressing, here's how you're advancing towards that aspirational vision, here's where you are today, here are the things that you should celebrate because these may be kind of uncommon practices in your industry, things that your organization's already doing, so let's celebrate where you are. But then also, let's use that data to build out a roadmap for how your organization can become a more gender equity and inclusion focused organization. And then let's repeat that process over time, right? Again, using data to build a business case internally for why this work matters, how organizations should stay competitive on this issue, right? We're talking about policies, practices, processes that when implemented well, will help organizations gain a competitive edge by hiring the best talent and having the most kind of loyal and committed workforce. And
Mhm.
absent those same policies and practices, create real business disruptions or potential business disruptions. So let's use data to help individual businesses advance and take action. And then let's also step back, and this is why Gender Ideal is a nonprofit. Let's then step back and take that data at scale and use it to help everyone kind of understand, here are where our normative standards are today. Here's what businesses are doing that are common things. And here are the kind of practices that are uncommon. And then let's talk about how we can kind of shift those norms and implement those practices more into the mainstream. So that's how we got to where we are today.
Wow. That's phenomenal. And I'm also thinking about a couple of things you said. You said move beyond shareholder to all stakeholders, but I feel like at work, employees are the last to be thought about. And the pandemic has really shaken things up for all of us to center employees and their experience. I'm curious, right? Like it's 2022, women have been working for a very long time, right? And we're still needing to have conversations and create tools to achieve gender equity. So, what are some of the questions that you're asking companies that they've never been asked about before, right? Around what kinds of policies and practices have they never thought about before?
Yeah, yeah, a great question, and the answer certainly depends upon each individual organization, right? I mean, we ran a pilot program last year where we had 24 companies take the full evaluation tool we call the Gender Ideal Assessment, and the responses again range greatly depending upon the size of the organization. We had a number of kind of earlier stage but rapidly growing fintech companies as examples, and then we had some older, more established, more mature businesses that had more of kind of that institutional structure in place. And so the things that were kind of new topics for them were quite different. But what we saw, what we continue to see is everything from, especially those earlier stage businesses, right? Maybe they have like 50 or 60 employees. They have one person who's in kind of an HR people function. What we heard from those companies was, wow, there's a lot of just kind of base level policies that we need to put into place, whether those are whistleblower policies, whether those are statements about the organization's stance on discrimination and harassment, and that we have a zero tolerance policy. Many of these things are things that the person in the HR function and the people who sit in kind of that C-suite and leadership roles are things that they say, well, of course that's our policy, of course that represents our values and what we believe in. But the reality is, if you haven't put that to paper and kind of disseminated and set a standard of expectation of culture across the whole workforce, it isn't known, right? It doesn't necessarily go beyond or is assumed by everyone outside of kind of that core group of leaders within the organization. So, I mean, we saw things like that. And then we saw, on the other end of the spectrum, organizations that really have already put a lot of work into this issue. And yet, still, I mean, we have kind of a series of questions that focus on how are you intentionally trying to set an inclusive culture in your workplace, and things like setting policies around work meeting norms, right? Ensuring that all voices are heard and really setting an expectation for that, so that when people are in a meeting, if there's kind of one dominant voice, you then have a policy that you can refer back to, right? To say, hey, John, let's make sure that everyone else's voices at this table are also being heard. That kind of, let's have others lean forward and allow folks to recognize when they need to lean back. Without some kind of institutional structure around that, raising that up in the moment when it's happening becomes very difficult. So that's kind of another example where very few companies had yet done that, but when they thought about, wow, that's a policy we could put in place and socialize across our organization, that was a kind of an easy thing and an exciting next step for many of the organizations to take. The last thing I want to say, and it refers specifically, I think, to many of our experiences during the pandemic and during the last 2 years, especially for many women who have caregiving responsibilities, whether that is children, whether that is aging relatives, whether that is neighbors or family members with disabilities who need extra care. This question of, wow, now my work and my home life are deeply intertwined, right? There's no separation for many of us. How do we, and the great resignation that we've seen in the last few months certainly has elevated this. How do we put boundaries around both our life and work, right? And there are lots of ways that organizations can help support their employees through this. In fact, these were questions that were already in the gender ideal assessment, which we launched just before the pandemic. And admittedly, they were very uncommon practices then. But I think our practices that now, 2 years into this pandemic, are things that all organizations should adopt. And those are things like training every manager on how to engage their teams and set boundaries, normative expectations around availability, right? So that someone can say, hey, I'm dropping off my kids from 8 to 8:30. I can't be on any conference calls at that time. Or I'm, doing dinner from 6 to 7. I can't do conference calls then, but I'm happy to be back on the phone from 9 to 10 if that's a better time. But whatever it is, to give space so that all employees can say, here's what I need to make this work for me so that I can show up at work and be fully present, but also know that then when I need to be fully present for my family, that I have the space to do that. And so again, that was the kind of question that we had in the assessment. Very few companies had been doing that, and those were companies that at that point were taking the assessment a year and a half into the pandemic. And so for those organizations, it gave them a very kind of tangible, actionable thing that they could do to better support all of their employees, not just their female employees, but but to help establish kind of that work-life balance that is needed as we work through this pandemic.
I love that. Okay, so a couple of nuggets that I just pulled out from your sharing. One of the things that I heard you say is that, when we come to work, there are social contracts in place. And those need to be super explicit, right? We can't assume that everybody's on the same page, right? About better policies and policies that maybe are not working that need to be revamped. So make it explicit. But as you're talking, the other thing that I can't help but pick up on is, the pandemic created it sort of leveled the playing field, right? And leaders had to experience a lot of the pain points that people have been advocating for forever, right? Like this idea that children need to be dropped off at school and fed dinners is obviously not a new one, right? But the fact that leaders and decision makers are now in the same boat as everybody else is level the playing field and has created a pathway around, or created a pathway to having better policies, which I think that in organizations that start assessing on an ongoing basis, we don't have to wait for leaders to experience the pain points to implement something that people need. So I'm curious, as you think back on the pilot, what is there one sort of interesting data point or correlation that you brought to a company's leadership that really sort of helped them think differently?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so I want to answer it by first just kind of giving some of the stats or trends that we noted as we went through all of the data that we had gathered during that pilot program. One thing that was really interesting was we saw the highest correlation in overall performance across the full gender ideal assessment. And just to give a little context of what we mean by that, it's a robust, comprehensive assessment that companies complete, and usually, it's one person or a couple of people who sit in an HR or people function, but it's not a 10-minute undertaking, right? I mean, there's a lot of data and some time that goes into that process. What we saw, though, when we looked again across all of that data that was collected in the overall performance of companies, was the highest correlation between having really thoughtful allyship programs and overall performance. Now, that's not
Mm.
totally surprising, right? Because allyship programs are kind of an uncommon practice, or a fairly uncommon practice. But the questions that we asked were, has your organization launched a program where you do mentoring, but then also where you have allyship programs where employees, particularly more senior level employees, are really incentivized to take on the role of an ally, and then articulating that through metrics that can be measured, and that can then be tied into potentially an employee's performance review or even potentially their compensation. So when organizations have been really thoughtful and intentional around how they're encouraging allyship internally, it lifts overall performance, right? The other way to think about that is, wow, that is a lot of effort that the organization has had to have made, and so organizations that are making that effort on allyship have probably done a lot of the other things that we also are measuring in the gender ideal assessment. But allyship was one. The other one, and again, not hugely surprising, but we saw a high correlation between overall performance and the number of women in, not just women in management, but women in executive management. And again, I think it's a bit of a lagging indicator, right? I mean, an organization has to have been intentional, thoughtful, deliberate to have good representation of women at a senior leadership level. But if they have done that and done it successfully, their overall performance on this broad variety of questions, policies, processes, performance, is high. Some areas where we found some kind of surprising results were a majority of the companies that took the assessment have already taken steps to, for example, improve their recruitment processes to make them kind of less biased and more inclusive. So examples of that would be they have processes in place to ensure that job descriptions are written in a way where the language used doesn't elicit potential kind of feelings of, oh, that's not a job for me. I'm not a rock star, right? Rock star is more of a male oriented word, if you will. But so companies that have thought about the language used in their job descriptions, companies that are thinking about where they're posting their job descriptions, and that have then set standards for having an inclusive slate of interviewees for a potential role. So have really thought pretty holistically about the recruitment process and how they are running kind of an unbiased and an inclusive recruitment process. That was not an uncommon practice that we saw, but where we found very few companies had yet spent much time or allocated much of their internal resources to was on the issue of performance reviews. So, how do you ensure that bias is not showing up in the performance review process as well as in the promotion process? And these are well documented, very important topics when it comes to gender equity in the workplace. The Lean In McKinsey survey, I think it was back in 2019 or 2020, characterized this as the broken rung, on the ladder syndrome, where we're seeing women enter the workforce at equal or even higher rates than men in entry level positions. But when you then look up the leadership ladder, women are kind of falling out of that upward promotion cycle, and much of that can be focused on because of performance reviews and subconscious or unconscious bias showing up in that performance review process that then results in those women not being promoted. And so the warning there, the word of caution is it's great that organizations are building out diverse and inclusive teams, but you're not solving the problem. You're just kind of kicking the can down the road, because that talent will leave when they feel that they have been kind of unfairly reviewed, or that they've been passed over for promotion. So it's a bit of a red flag or warning in the data that we saw from the pilot. The other thing, I mean, there was kind of a happy observation, if you will, when we asked questions around family leave policies. And again, this ties back to issues that have become even more important through the pandemic, and recognition that employees just have these times that they need to take off of work, whether it is to care for a sick parent or a sick kid, or take care of themselves, right? We need good comprehensive leave policies. And the upside in our pilot findings was that more companies have now implemented universal family leave policies, meaning they're not distinguishing by gender, and they're not distinguishing by secondary or primary caregiver. That's really important. And the majority of our pilot organizations are providing at least 12 weeks of paid leave to all employees that qualify for family leave, men and women. But where we again saw the need for more attention to be focused was on policies that are supporting reentry back to work for those employees, right? So the data shows many. I'm gonna fall back into kind of traditional caregiver roles here for a moment, but many women leave the workforce. If they come back after family leave, they end up leaving within like the first week of returning to work, because it feels overwhelming and unmanageable. But if organizations can thoughtfully craft return to work schedules for women and men returning from family leave, they are more likely to retain those employees over the long run. But when we ask that question, how are you supporting return to work? Very few of the organizations have coherent policies that all managers are aware of. Even though when you talk to those same organizations, they'd say, oh, of course we can be flexible and return to work. But the reality is, if someone is struggling with how am I coming back to work after having taken leave, how am I going to be able to sustain this for myself and my family? If there's not a policy that they can pull up in their employee handbook, they don't know it exists, and they are more likely to not come back. So there's still work to be done, though. We do see good highlights in the data. And so how all of that distills down to, though, the individual organizations that participated in our pilot, we really looked at every company's responses, and where other companies had policies already in place or processes in place, but a particular organization didn't. We then would say, this is something that your organization should focus on. This is one of those 5 things that you should commit to improving on over the next 12 months.
Thank you for sharing that. And like, what great insights that like you've been able to collect from the pilot. So you said something about like, when people notice they're not getting promoted, they tend to leave, right? So all of the work that you've done to have a diverse workforce, well, if you haven't managed for bias and all of these crucial steps, and people leave. And so I want to switch gears a little bit to talking about race, because who was the least likely to get promoted is women of color.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are some of the policies and practices specifically that help women of color be seen and thrive in workplaces? Like, what are some of the things that you're learning through the pilots and working with companies?
Yeah. So one of the big learnings through the pilot is that organizations are not yet, most organizations are not yet doing a good enough job tracking leadership demographics, so entry level, junior managers, mid-level managers, and then senior managers, beyond men and women. Right. So we ask in our gender ideal assessment for all of those leadership demographics, not just by gender, but gender and then segmented by race: Black or African American women, Asian American, Pacific Islanders, mixed race, Latina, I think I already said Asian American, Pacific Islanders, and then white women, right? And so it's not just enough to say, do you have women represented at all these levels? But we're saying, how are they represented at all these levels, looking through that lens of race? We do that at leadership demographics. We do that also for promotion rates, right? Are you tracking promotion rates with that level of granularity, as well as retention, right? And this gets back to the earlier part of our conversation, but who's leaving your organization? Do you really understand who's leaving? You need to know who's leaving to then answer the second question, why are they leaving, right? But if you don't even know who's leaving, you're not going to really get to the root of the issue. And what we found was most of the pilot participants were able to provide responses to all of those questions, when you just looked at women as a group, but very few were able to then provide responses when we tried to disaggregate that data by race. That's super important, right? Across all of those leadership demographics, promotion, retention, as well as pay equity, right? And this, again, we're talking about data. If you're not tracking the numbers, then you don't even know you have a problem, right? So beginning to institutionalize tracking all of that information and calculating those figures on an annual basis is critically important. We also ask that for pay equity, right? Don't just disaggregate this men and women, but disaggregate by race. And I just want to mention like a few stats because I think it's so important. We talk about the pay equity gap between men and women. It's 85 cents or 82 cents for every dollar that a non-Hispanic white man earns. But let's dig a little deeper. For Latina women, it's 57 cents to the dollar. For Black women, it's 63 cents to the dollar. For Asian American Pacific Islander women, it's 85 cents to the dollar. So our organization's really digging into that data to understand where pay equity exists. It's a huge issue. A couple of other specific questions that are less on the data side, but more on the policy and practice side. In our policy and benefits section, we ask a specific question around healthcare affordability. So we ask companies to calculate what is the ratio of healthcare premium for your company's healthcare insurance policy to the lowest paid worker. Typically, the lowest paid worker in an organization is a woman. Typically, that is a woman of color. And there's a body of data that shows that affordability of healthcare, that derails a family. If you cannot afford your health care when you have an illness, it can send a family into, generational debt. And so if your company provides health care, but the lowest paid workers still can't afford it, then you're not doing enough. And again, that has a specific gender and race component to it. And then I guess the last example I would cite is we have a question in our culture and inclusion section that asks, does your workplace have a written policy? I'm going to read it. Does your workplace have a written policy that explicitly allows workers to wear their hair, clothing, and jewelry in a way that reflects their identity? Again, there's, I think, good data that exists that if a person does not feel that they can come to work with their hair done in a natural way or with jewelry that shows their, heritage, they don't really feel like they can show up as themselves. And so encouraging companies to have a policy that says, we want you to do that. We encourage you to do that. And this is a safe environment in which you should show up as your full self, is a relatively simple thing that the organization can do that I think has a huge impact on its employees. That's an example of a question that from the pilot, very few companies had that policy in place, but the feedback we heard was, that's such a cool idea. Of course we can do that because it does represent our organization's values. So.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for bringing that point up, because I think that, companies don't have to do big, expensive displays of it, like policy rollouts and new tools, right? I think saying something as simple as, we want you to wear your hair in any way that feels really comfortable, can make a really big difference. And as a woman of color, like, it makes me so sad that in 2022 we live in a country where, in the vast majority of the states in the US, organizations can discriminate on the basis of hair specifically,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And only 12 states have passed the Crown Act, which explicitly bans discrimination on the basis of hair. So, to anybody who's watching, I'm going to say, here's something that you can take away and implement this week. You don't have to wait another month or 6 months to implement. You can create a really clear policy and then have practices that make sure that when people are coming to work with, their hair that's natural, or I think in the Pacific Northwest, we're so used to wearing black and gray that, yeah, if you wore something that has a print or color, like, that's totally normal, right? And we're not going to exoticize people who are doing that. We're just going to expand the scope of what is normal.
Mhm.
And so give it a try, roll it out. And Lori, I want to thank you so much for chatting with me today and sharing the work of Gender Ideal. I'm really excited about the kind of questions that you're asking companies and the ways in which you're pushing companies to use data to activate and have accountability and really start to integrate, the equity aspirations, if you will, into compensation and other, like, daily practices and mechanisms. So thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks everybody that joined us this morning. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks for the opportunity. Bye bye.